I remember the exact color of the coffee cup he left in the sink the night I found out. It was one of those ugly matte things he insisted made every kitchen look modern, slate gray, with a hairline crack near the base that let steam escape in a whisper. He'd call it character. I called it evidence. My name is Olivia. I loved Mark Hale. I loved him the way you love a novel you can't stop reading, with sleepless nights and a slow, greedy appetite for every page. He was 3 years older, soft-jawed, efficient at small talk and devastating at apologies. He worked in marketing for a tech company that sold optimism by subscription. He laughed at my dark jokes. He introduced me as my Olivia, and I learned to fill that phrase like an empty bowl, to lean into its warmth until it became habit. It didn't hurt at first. Love is a landscape that contains its own storms. Petty fights about dishes, whispered resentments about weekends. We weathered them, the two of us, like couples who know each other's weather systems. It hurt later, slowly, like frost spreading under the skin. That frost had a name when I found the phone. I had stayed late at the office, sifting through files for a client who didn't deserve my patience. At 2 in the morning I was half-sozzled on caffeine and righteousness when Mark texted, "Home in 15. Pick us up something?" It was flippant, the sort of text I'd sent 1,000 times. The phrase, "pick us up something," threaded me to the illusion of us. He came home at 3. I'd made a half-hearted attempt to sleep on the couch and failed. The TV was still on. The light in the kitchen painted his face a weary domestic glow. He moved like he belonged. He hummed something under his breath as he rinsed the gray cup. He didn't notice the screen leaning against the arm of the couch. Mark had a habit of leaving his phone face up while he did the dishes. I don't know why he allowed my fingers to be curious, or why the rules of privacy seemed to evaporate in the dark. I clicked the lock and the chat floated up. Her name was Hannah Reyes, an account manager from a rival startup. Pictures tumbled, a sepia-toned selfie of Hannah with a glass of wine, a shot of Mark laughing at something off camera, a blurred photo of a hotel keycard. My body metabolized betrayal like a foreign substance. I felt none of the melodrama I'd prepared in private nights. No violent scenes of confrontation, no cinematic shouting matches. Instead, there was a cold, focused clarity, as if someone had turned on a light in a room I thought I knew by touch. The texts were affectionate, personal, too easy. "Can't wait to see you," was a sentence that folded my stomach. "You're different with me." That was the knife. What followed wasn't explosive. It was surgical. I didn't confront Mark with the phone. I held it like a live ember and watched him in the half-light of the kitchen, rinsing and humming, unaware that the floor he stood on had been replaced with ice. The thing people don't tell you about revenge is that it's less a spike and more a long, slow architecture. You don't build vengeance in a fist. You build it brick by brick until the structure outlives its builder. I started small. I observed. Not in that lurid cinematic way that would horrify a lawyer. I listened to his patterns. Mark left his keys on the living room table, his laptop sleeping on the coffee table with an unlocked Bluetooth connection, his receipts in the pocket of his jacket draped over the chair. He had an appointment with Hannah on Friday, texted at 3 in the afternoon. On my way. Room 508. It was the line that answered its own question. When he left for the hotel, he kissed me. He smelled like the cologne he wore to client dinners and the fear I thought would be mine. I memorized the smell like a spell. You might expect that I wanted him to suffer. I did, of course. But at first it was a selfish suffering I desired, the kind that makes him understand the temperature of loss. As I stood at the sink and dried a plate with trembling hands, I realized my anger needed an audience. It wanted to be seen, not as spectacle but as justice. I wanted him to know that the life he had built in the shadow of our apartment, the spreadsheets, the weekend brunches, the neurotic color coding of his socks, was not a background. It was a stage, and he had put a lie at center stage. So I began to write. Maybe it's a strange metaphor, revenge is literature, but I am, in my bones, an editor. I revised the narrative of our life until it fitted my purpose. I made files and lists logical, neat. I called it the arrangement. Step 1. The fracture. You plant a seed of suspicion where there was complacency. Not by shouting, not by dramatic revelations meant for midnight sermons, but by subtle, undeniable facts that demand attention. A missed meeting here, a scheduling conflict there. An email I engineered to appear at the top of his inbox. Expense approval, overnight stay 508, please confirm. He disputed it, swore in the shower steam that the conference had been changed. He took my doubts for a bureaucratic annoyance. He underestimated me. Step 2. The network. People are ecosystems. If you disrupt their flows, the whole organism gets sick. So I harvested connections. I called Hannah's office, asked casual questions that sounded like they could belong to a curious competitor. I found out which bar she liked, by which route she commuted, the name of the dog she posted about on Instagram. I met her once, briefly, at a networking event, a collision of flutes and smiles. She was luminous in a way that made Mark look ordinary by comparison. She had that cultivated charm people mistake for warmth. I didn't approach Hannah with accusations. That would have been clumsy, and besides, I wanted her to be useful in ways neither of us could foresee. I started a quiet campaign of presence. I liked her Instagram photos. I sent neutral messages about shared industry podcasts. I became an annotation at the edge of her social feed. Familiar, plausible, unthreatening. My little acts of benign stalking were not meant to trap. They were meant to carve channels. Step 3. The mirror. The most effective punishment is to show someone the reflection of themselves and let vanity do the rest. Mark was proud of his reputation. The modest, capable man. He was proud of being the friend who always knew the right restaurant. He loved being right. So I turned his pride into his Achilles heel. I leaked a rumor, or rather, I curated one. I made it innocuous, a casual chat in a gym locker room about industry snobbery, about how some people use emotional connections to climb. I left out the names. The rumor curled towards him like smoke. People began to whisper. Did Mark get that deal because he had a way with clients? Was he too close to the competition? I didn't invent the thought. I seeded it into the soil of existing suspicion. People plucked it and made it theirs. It worked. His colleagues became a little colder. His boss started asking more pointed questions. The company's PR department, a tight-lipped collective practiced in the art of damage control, suggested he take personal leave to handle some health issues. I watched him shrink inside a polite email. I watched his calendar empty the way a tide retreats. Revenge, I discovered, has a taste. The slow wine of observation, the fizzy delight of small humiliations that accumulate into something undeniable. I began to savor the way Mark recalibrated his posture around people who had once been deferential. He smiled differently at the office, his eyes darting for safety. That safety was evaporating. He didn't know why. By then, I had already decided not to break him physically. I learned the way you learn grammar, through endless exposure, that total ruin yields a strange emptiness. I wanted him to lose what he had been sure of. Not only my body but my trust, the story we had told ourselves about forever. I wanted him to understand that choice has consequences. To watch him fall from benignness into a landscape of suspicion would be, for me, the true victory. There is an anatomy to humiliation. It begins with isolation. I fed rumors and let 1,000 micro-edges chip away at his social capital. I cultivated allies in the places he valued. His friends, his co-workers, the little priesthood of people who count in corporate networks. I offered tips disguised as casual conversation. I mentioned, in the exact tone of someone revealing an earnest concern, that I'd heard about 2 employees spotted together at a hotel. I framed it as worry for his reputation. People are performative about virtue. They will distance themselves from scandal to feel safer. He began to lose invitations. He stopped being the man who could walk into a room and command a laugh. He texted me once weeks in, "What did you do?" He phrased it like a diagnosis. I answered nothing. Silence is a tool. When you don't explain, the imagination does the rest of the work, and imagination is a cruel engineer. Then I moved closer to the things people hold dear. Their employment, their future. Mark had a presentation on a new client pitch that would anchor his position at work. It was in effect a small crown. I made sure it slipped from his head. I could have fabricated data, but fabrication could be uncovered. I chose instead to make him doubt himself in front of the people who mattered. At 3 a.m, while the city slept and the apartment breathed with its mechanical heart, I wrote an email. Precise, benevolent, impossible to pin down as malice. Mark, it began. I worry you're spreading yourself too thin. Don't forget you're brilliant when you're focused. Maybe consider taking a step back. I CC'd 2 of his senior colleagues. The message was passive-aggressive in a way that was maddeningly kind. It implied competence and concern. It suggested that maybe he should delegate the pitch. It suggested that he might not be ready. He responded with a terse, professional apology. He delegated the pitch. He called me later and asked, voice flat with something like fear, "Why would you do that?" He didn't ask it as accusation. He asked it as if trying to understand a dream. I replied with a question I'd been collecting for weeks. "Did you love me?" Mark's silence at that question was a betrayal worse than the affair. It was not the affair that made me furious so much as the ease with which he sidestepped the question of us. He was a man made of soft deterrence, plausible deniability, carefully timed remorse. He would apologize and then, like a gambler, return to the bet. He tried to explain. He painted Hannah as an accident of loneliness, a mannish companionship that had occurred when the light went out between us. He said, "We were both dumb." I wanted to crawl under the bed and weep at his ordinariness. Instead, I pretended to consider. I let his explanations hang in the air like unpaid bills. It is funny how people reveal their character when things are slipping. When Mark realized his professional scaffolding was wobbling, he grew panicky. He began to text in bursts, to email in the dead of night, to show up at my job pretending casualness. I could see the edges of him fraying. Petty jealousies sharpened, old insecurities bled into rage. He accused me of being a show-off. He called me vindictive, like it was an accusation, not a compliment. I learned to love the weather of his panic. It warmed me in a way I cannot explain. Loneliness is a chemical. So is power. I tasted both. But there comes a moment in any plan when you must decide what shape the final act will take. I could have orchestrated a public spectacle, spilled texts on social media, a dramatic revelation at his office, perhaps a viral hashtag. Those are the dopamine bombs of revenge. Instant, loud, satisfying in a shallow way. I wanted something that would last. I wanted an ending that would not be a flash but a wound that would scar. So I set a trap that required no violence, only truth. Hannah and Mark had been together in a way that demanded secrecy. They were careful, habitual liars. They left a trail not of footprints but of patterns. Hotel bookings, synchronous postings, mutual friends. I compiled those patterns into an archive and then into a single narrative's worth of evidence. I considered sending it to his workplace. I considered sending it to Hannah's husband, because she, too, had the facade of commitment I envied and wanted to see cracked. In the end, I took another route. I printed everything. There is archaic power in ink. A printed packet is tactile. It is serious. It asks to be seen. I arranged the photos, the messages, the receipts, the hotel confirmations into a thin, deliberate dossier. On the top, in neat block letters, I typed, "To Mark Hale. From Olivia. Time now." I placed the dossier on his pillow. I wrote nothing else. He found it as he returned from a meeting that his boss had finally insisted he attend alone. He came into the bedroom like a man stepping into a trap he could not see. His face paled. He read. His fingers slid through the pages as if they might catch on the truth and pull it away, like a child attempting to snatch a flame from the air. "I didn't," he began. "You did," I said. My voice was quiet. It had been quiet for too long. The apartment sucked the sound and held it, like someone listening at the door. "I'm sorry," he said. The apology was immediate, rehearsed, a verb he used to shape his face. But what I wanted wasn't his sorry. I wanted him to know he had been seen. The consequences were immediate, messy, beautiful. Mark tried to salvage his career. He met with HR. He was called into closed-door meetings where men and women in neutral tones discussed professional boundaries. Hannah was confronted. Her company issued a statement about inappropriate relationships and conflicts of interest. Her boyfriend, yes, she had one, something Mark had neglected to mention, left her texts unread for days. Rumors were not the only architects of ruin. Bureaucracy and morality make tidy scaffolding. Then something happened I didn't expect. Mark fought back. When people begin to lose everything, they do not always crumble. Sometimes they fight in primitive, animal ways. He presented denials and half-truths. He cried publicly. He blamed me for being controlling, for inventing betrayal out of thin air. He tried to paint himself as the wounded party, the one betrayed by my inability to trust. People believed him because he was practiced at being charming. It was in the aftermath of his pleading that I realized revenge is not a single act, but a long-term recalibration of power. I wanted more than humiliation. I wanted the world to realign its gravity around me. I wanted the safety I had given away to be returned, not as a charity but as an earned piece of the world. So I took his name. Not literally. I took the life he had borrowed from me. I began to reassert myself in public. Where he had once been the siren who led invitations, I took up the mantle. I joined my own circle of colleagues. I spoke at panels. I laughed in rooms where his gifty nods once resounded. I taught myself to live in the space he had left with the same graciousness he had exhibited when he used me as a prop. He watched. He watched like a man watching a boat he'd once captained sail into other hands. Sometimes his eyes met mine across a crowded room and he would try to swallow the shame into a smile. He grew thinner in that smile. There was a hollowing that made him dangerous. Not violent, but volatile in the way of pride that becomes a claw. And then he slipped. It was not a dramatic fall. It happened on a Wednesday when the weather was indifferent. He had started dating again, something obvious and petty at first, a few dates, a new haircut, as if he could stitch himself back together with fabric scanned from other people's lives. He was on his way to becoming fine in the way people do when time erases details and memory becomes polite. He made a mistake that betrayed the core of his arrogance. He assumed I had nothing left to say. He assumed I would be silent out of wounded civility. He sent a message, a casual offhand text intended for someone else, that was accusatory in tone. She's trying to ruin me. In it he mentioned names. He forgot to BCC a thread. He forgot that in his life of digital clumsiness, the internet keeps receipts. The message folded into the right hands. His new partner saw it, and forwarded it to mutual friends. People began to talk about him in the earnest tone reserved for people finally seen. A former client rescinded a contract. His boss, tired of the reputational hazard, offered him a severance package instead of an internal promotion. The severance was polite. It had conditions. He was furious. He accused me of orchestrating his unemployment. He called me vindictive again, as if the term absolved him. "You don't understand," he said one night, the apartment echoing his claim. "You had me. You had everything. I didn't have you," I said. My voice was cold now, the way it takes for someone who has been practicing an anatomy of anger. "You had your reflection. You had your options. You took my job." He said it like a wound. "I exposed choices," I corrected. "You made them." In the end, he packed a bag and left the city. People left cities all the time, as if geography could fix character. He moved to a smaller town where anonymity was plentiful and memory less ravenous. He posted a few photos of his new life like a man trying to stitch a narrative on a foreign loom. He tried to rebuild. Of course he tried. People rebuild, and that was his final punishment. A second life with nothing that bore the delicious weight of consequence. What did I gain? The answer is messy. I felt at first a triumphant intoxication, a gleeful vindication that hummed beneath everyday tasks. I had made him feel the loss, the tremor of a person revising a biography. I had shown him that actions have a gravity that returns like tides. But revenge doesn't bring peace. It rearranges the furniture of your heart so that some rooms are forever without light. I found myself after the victory, alone in a way that felt new and fragile. There was a quietness to the apartment that used to be comfortable, now hollowed like a bell. I learned to befriend that quiet. I took long walks, wrapped in a coat that smelled faintly of his old cologne and nothing else. I met new people and let conversation be what it is. A place to drop a pebble and see how the ripples fell. People asked me what I had done, when the outlines of Mark's downfall became public gossip, when Hannah's career moved into a private exile, when I accepted an invitation to speak about resilience at a panel. Some asked with the prurient calm of those who want to know which part of the story they can place their sympathy on. Others asked with a genuine curiosity that made me feel seen. I told them sometimes the truth. I told them about the phone and the messages. I told them about the small acts of subtraction that came after. I told them that it was not righteous so much as necessary, that our relationship had been a trade, and the price had been too dear. Not everyone approved. A woman at a party once told me sternly that I had crossed a line, that I had inflicted cruelty. "You could have left," she said. "You could have simply left." I thought about this for a long time. And I realized that people who say, "You could have left," are imagining a simpler moral universe than the one that exists. Leaving is not always a clean action. It is a negotiation with memory and fear and sometimes, the need for justice. We forgive for different reasons. Because we want to forget or because we want to change the pattern. I wanted to change it. There is a scene I replay at nights, the one that tells me I won. It is not the scene of his unemployment or the way the office gave polite condolences. It's smaller. It's the quiet, accidental moment at a coffee shop where I saw him months later, hair shorter, eyes tired. He was with a woman I did not know. They were talking about something trivial, their hands animated over cups. I watched him smile, a brittle thing, the sort people wear to hurried dinners, and I saw birds on his shoulders that had once been mine. He caught my gaze and looked away quickly, like a man who has been seen naked and finds the world unbearably bright. Victory is not a shout. It is a rearrangement. It is the knowledge that the person who once lied to you now carries the bruise of having been exposed. It is the quiet aliveness that comes from knowing you built yourself anew with your own hands. Sometimes at night, when the city is a smear of distant light and my apartment is only a room, I think of what I could have become if I had chosen forgiveness. A woman who let sorrow make her softer, who forgave and moved on with a genteel tenderness. That version of me would have been a different novel. She might have been happier in cheap, sunlit ways. She might have found love again in a quieter form. I do not regret the path I chose. I do not say it was the holiest or the most noble. I only know it was mine. There is a moment, toward the end of any revenge, when the energy that fueled you must be replaced. Revenge is a combustion engine. It burns. After you burn, lightness is required. For me, that lightness came in the form of reclaiming small pleasures. A book read without counting the ways its protagonist resembled Mark. A walk without inventory of his infidelities. Laughter unmeasured by whether it was deserved. I do not think of Mark every day now. Sometimes I do, and the memory is a small sharp thing that I carry in a pocket like a coin. I have learned to spend it sparingly. Occasionally I wonder if he thinks of me with any clarity, or if I have become one of those ghosts people mention in hotel rooms and at conferences, a footnote in a life that spun in a different direction. The last time I saw him, we passed on the street like ships briefly breaking space. His face registered recognition, then something like regret, then the practiced indifference of a man who had learned to conceal his vulnerabilities. He inclined his head toward me in a motion that was both apology and admission, a small human thing. I returned the nod as if it were a speech. That is, perhaps, the final mercy I offered him. Attention, not spectacle. This is my confession and my victory. I did not murder him or the people who loved him. I did not orchestrate spectacle. I used the simplest weapon available to someone who has been wronged. Truth, presented in a way that could not be easily denied. I created consequences that were proportional, in my mind, to the betrayal. Maybe some would call it cruelty. Perhaps they would be right. But here's the part one want you to understand. Revenge changed me as much as it changed him. It taught me that power is quieter than we think, and that the most devastating acts are sometimes those that refuse the immediacy of spectacle. It taught me that when someone you love betrays you, you can choose to be a victim or a rewriter. I chose to rewrite. Tonight, as I finish this, the coffee kettle clicks into silence. On the kitchen counter there is a new mug, white, uncracked. I bought it the week after he left. When I run my hand over its rim, I feel a small domestic satisfaction that is not contaminated by triumph. It is the pleasure of a person who has survived, who has arranged the pieces of her life into a room that is hers. If you ask me whether I'm proud of what I did, the answer will be complicated and honest. There is a line between justice and vengeance that everyone walks differently. I walked it with intention. I am still learning how to sit in the quiet that follows. And sometimes, late at night when the city is a low engine and my phone sleeps beside me like an obedient animal, I imagine Mark reading this, if he ever did. I imagine him folding the paper of his life and smoothing it out to see the creases. Perhaps he will understand finally, the thing about choices, that they are not secrets, and that someone else's life can be a mirror you cannot unsee.